So, popular music and immersion. Immersive music as the future of commercial music delivery, or indeed the present of commercial music delivery. My name's Dr. Andrew Bourbon. Welcome here to Green Rooms 1 in the heart of the University of Huddersfield. We're here today to talk to you about this idea about immersive music being not just the future, but actually the present of commercial music delivery, and a really exciting opportunity for music content creators, mixers, producers, labels, the whole industry, to be doing something really exciting in making music delivery new and just say something different to what we've had before, and indeed better, because if it's not better, why are we doing it? So why are we doing it? That must be probably the question I think a lot of people want to know. Why are we doing this? And I think for this we actually need to go back to the very fundamentals of why do we mix music at all. And for that, I'd like to use a couple of pictures. I think I've got a couple of pictures here that are quite interesting. Here we've got this smiley-looking chap, big grin. We've got a lovely background, calm, seas, beach, all this kind of imagery that makes me go, this is a very content picture. Here, this is a very, very sad picture. We can see here this particular character looking incredibly sad. Rain, puddles, but in the background we can see that it's raining, wet, a bit grim. You know, the story is told on so many levels based on all the things that we can see. This one here, we can see people are dancing. Even though it's a still image, we can see that there's movement. We've got the idea of the lights, the sparkling, the shiny lights, the energy, the excitement, the buzz. And of course, sometimes the world is on fire. Here we've got a character who's on fire and looking, trying to put the fire out, escape from the fire, things are not going well. And when we're mixing, what we're doing is what's happened in all of these pictures. We're trying to take an emotion, we're trying to take a narrative, we're trying to take something and communicate it to our listener more strongly than the original product did that. And that's one of the things we're really trying to do. And also to make it fit a particular format. So it might be a particular size or a particular quality or something that we're aiming for. But that's what we're doing when we're mixing. We're trying to communicate feelings, emotions, ideas, narrative through mixing. And for the last, goodness knows how many years, we've been doing this in stereo. And when we work in stereo, as you can see, I've got all the different elements that I'm trying to mix, and I've got to fit them into this image created by two speakers, which is quite unrealistic to our regular world. Normally when we hear sound from all around us. When I hear sound from these big speakers that I'm sat in front of, the sound bounces off the walls around me. Now, to control that, we've got acoustic treatment in here to give us a space that's as true to the stereo as possible. But in the world around us, there's lots of sound bouncing around. And you can see here, I've got lots of elements where the elements have the same frequencies, the same pitches, and they're in the same space. So they're fighting. And interestingly, with psychoacoustics, we've learned, you can see here, we've got, for example, a sound that's at 150 hertz, which is quite a low end sound. Within 100 hertz of that 150 hertz center frequency, the loudest sound at that frequency will be the one that we hear, and the other ones will be masked, they'll be hidden. So if we've got two sounds, they fight, and the one that's strongest wins that battle in our listening. And one of the things that we've always had to do in mixing is to fight these fights, and we've learned to do that. And you can see I've got examples of it here with kick and bass existing in that same space. Here we are, snare and vocals, two things that drive musical enjoyment for so many people. So many people latch onto drums, but a lot of people listen to music to hear the vocals. How do we solve all of these problems? So we've solved these problems with EQ, with reverb tools, all sorts of things to create depth, energy, compression, to bring things forward, to bring in detail, to remove dynamic range, to push sounds to sustain, harmonic distortion, all sorts of tools that we have to make things fit into this image coming from these stereo speakers. But what if, instead of having these two fixed points in the stereo world, we had the whole 360-degree sound field to work with? And in fact, this is where we're at. And one of our previous Discover lectures that was delivered by my colleague, Professor Hyun-Kuk Lee, provided a really excellent summary of this in terms of the core technology and the core affordances of that technology. And again, we'll link you through to that video in the video you're looking at today, in case you wanted to go back and see how this kind of immersive world works. But as you can see from the image in front of us, the idea is that we have sounds above us, sounds around us, and we have this sort of effective 360-degree space in which we can work. So no longer are things fighting to fit. We can spread things out if we want. But also, when I listen in a room, I have sound bouncing off the walls. I can do that. I can have the sound every time sound hits a wall and bounces off. You need to think about the fact that that wall has become another instrument. It's another player. in our musical experience that's re-radiating that sound. It's bouncing back off. It becomes another new sound that we need to work with. And by having these kind of immersive systems, it gives us the potential to recreate really, truly realistic spaces and to give a quite realistic experience of what we expect from the sound around us, which is the sound that we hear every day. It's fantastic. So how do we do it? Well, we go about this by mixing using some form of mixing tool, and the sort of market leader on this front has been the Dolby Atmos system, using the Dolby Atmos renderer. And the idea here is that I can take a sound and I can say, I want you to come from exactly there or up there. I can choose where I want the sound to come from, and I tell it where to come from using the panner. And again, you can see here, I've just put a circle on the slides here around some of the controls. I can also click and drag the ball in the center there. I can move that one around and we can see what's going on with that. But it gives me the ability to say, I want the sound to come from there. And then the renderer goes, well, what speakers have you got? Okay, you've got this many speakers. This is how I best do that. So if you're at home with a 5.1 system, it will do its best to make the sound come from where you want it to on that system. But the thing about 5.1 is we have 5 speakers around us and 1 subwoofer, no height. And height, I think, is one of the things that makes this truly work, that creates this immersive or enveloping experience, depending on the sort of language that we're looking to use and what we're trying to achieve in a given track. And so by having height speakers, all of a sudden we give ourselves the ability to create height through reproduction. And you'll see here that the standard, if you like, for archiving of this Dolby Atmos material, when we burn down to channels, within the render we have objects, and objects come from a certain place, and then the object will then come out of certain channels in order to then sound like it's coming from where we've asked it to. And so we tell the render that we've got a 7.1.4 system. And again, we've got one of our small production spaces you can see here, which has got a 714. You can see the 2 speakers hanging at height in red 3 there, or in a more sort of lounge domestic setting on the Dolby image that you can see on the left-hand side of the page. That's showing where these 714 are. So we've got 7 around us and 4 at height. And all of a sudden I can say, I want this object to come from here, and then the renderer will then do what it needs to do to make it come from there. But you might be thinking, well, this is great, but I don't have a 7.1.4 speaker system. I don't have the 20+ thousand pounds required just to buy the speakers, let alone to hang them, run the cable, and have the box that lets me control the volume. Well, the good news is, the other thing that this can do is it can allow us to listen back what we call binaurally on a pair of headphones. So all of a sudden I can put my headphones on, and traditionally that sound that would be coming in when I listen on headphones, traditionally the sound is rendered in my head. It's a very close sound where the sound can move inside my head, it can't move outside it. When we go to binaural playback, we take that sound source and place it outside by using filtering and all sorts of clever processing, etc., to generate this binaural render. Again, if I'm sat hearing the left-hand speaker here, I hear the left-hand speaker in my left ear and my right ear. It takes a bit longer to get to my right ear, and sound has to bend around my head a bit, and all of those profiles, I still know it's coming from the left. Binaural, we're doing that but in the headphones, so we're mimicking what it's like to listen on these kind of speakers. And you can see here we've got Virtuoso, which is actually a product that's developed by Professor Lee and his team. Developed this Virtuoso tool here at the university, and it allows me to go, actually, I've got 9.1.6 in my room, and you can see I've got 9 speakers around me and 6 speakers at height plus a subwoofer, and this will allow me to put my headphones on, and I feel like I'm in this real 9.1.6 space. I can change the size of the room. So if I want to get the experience of listening in a big room, I can listen in a big room or a small room. I've got all this ability to configure the speakers, the headphones, the whole lot, meaning that I don't have to spend that 20-odd thousand pounds on speakers. I don't have to do that. It's something I don't have to worry about. I've got the ability to then hear what's going on my headphones alone, which is absolutely fantastic, really, really good. And it means that when you're walking around listening to music on your mobile device, here is a mobile device, I can listen to Atmos music on this device on my headphones. Absolutely fantastic. So amazing that we can listen in stereo, a real something I'm binaurally to our immersive mixes. But I suppose the next question, now we've established that the technology is in place to allow us to make this music and for people to hear that music. It's always been one of the problems with technology when we look at Quad 5.1. They're all systems that require significant investment from the listener to be able to hear the music. Now, everybody can hear that music when using headphones. So we know we're in a place now where it's a market. And in fact, we know that in the last year, Billboard Top 100 tracks, I believe it was over 90% of those tracks had artists who had Billboard Top 100 records had Atmos mixes. We know we're at the point now, and this is why I say it's not the future. It's the present that we're listening to Atmos music. What the future is how do we use this in different ways? How do we make this better? Because again, as I said earlier, what's the point in doing it if we're not going to have a better, more enriched experience for the listener? That's why we do this. It has to give us something that the stereo can't give us. And that's not to say that the stereo is not incredibly important still. And we'll talk about this a bit more, but currently the sort of position is when asked to generate an Atmos mix, the stereo mix is still the mix that's given the priority. The stereo mix is the priority mix, the stereo master is the priority master. And then as an Atmos mixer, you have to generally, I mean, there are cases where this isn't the case, but generally speaking, you are asked to match your Atmos mix to the stereo. So you want to make sure that when you tell the renderer that you're listening in 2.0 stereo, it sounds as close to as possible the true stereo master, but when you are in immersive, that we're gaining something from this experience. So the first step in research that we did, and we did this research a little while ago now, something we presented last summer at the Audio Engineering Society International Conference on Spatial Audio, which we actually hosted here at Huddersfield. It was a fantastic event. We presented some of our findings, and it was quite interesting just to look, for example, at what speakers were being used. And you can see from the graph on the left here that with the exception of the LFE speaker, all the speakers are used around at least 90% of the time, and most of them are at 100. There was one track that didn't use height. It was very strange. There was an Atmos mix that didn't use height, and it's very much an outlier. But we can see that all the speakers are used. The center speaker is used less, and indeed, when you look at the contract that you'll often receive from a label when mixing Atmos music, there are some quite specific instructions as to how you can and cannot use that center speaker. So some people choose not to use it or use it less, or for very specific things. We had some really interesting innovative practice with, for example, there was a grind track where the lead vocal, all of the diction bits were sort of gated out and then placed into the center speaker to give this kind of extra emphasis on clarity, which I thought was a really interesting thing to hear. So again, we're seeing lots of speakers used across our 714, which is what we used as our reference point. But also, it was interesting to look at what kind of percentage of elements were included in those speakers. And by elements, I might mean like drums or bass or guitar, pianos, keyboards, all these sorts of things. So we broke it kind of down and had a look at it. And interestingly, even though the front is still quite dominant in terms of the mix perspective, largely because things like drums tend to be locked into those, you can see the center and the LFE, way less in them, way less of the elements in there. Just quickly have a look at what's going on here. So we can see kick, very focused on the front. Snare, very focused on the front. Bass, again, very focused on the front. But synth bass, interestingly, we see synth bass also embracing the LFE a lot more. So it's interesting. When elements are electronic in nature, they tended to explore the LFE a little bit more, which is quite exciting. Guitars as well, just very quickly, we can see guitars often actually found in the sides. So people are spreading, we know that guitars are clashing with keyboards and organs and all sorts of things. By moving them out, we're creating more excitement enveloping width, which is really what people have been doing there. And again, with piano, we can see based on the nature of the production, is the piano a lead element? Is it more of a sort of paddy element, something like that? We have different sort of positioning for where the piano ends up. And we can see here the yellow graph is the sides. And then we've got the rears also seeing a lot of piano energy. So piano piano particularly is something that we're seeing spread across different things. This was based on an analysis of 100 Atmos mixes that we listened to. This I think is one of the most interesting ones. So reverb. Our drum reverb, for example, we saw kick, snare, drums, they're very much located in the front, but actually the reverbs are located all around us in the surround channels. Which again shows us this idea of recreating this natural space, this idea of we hear the drums hit and then we hear the drums wash past us. Not because the drums move past us, but because the energy from the drums moves past us. And we could see people recreating this in their mixes with the use of reverb on drums. And it's amazing how, as I say, enveloping is a word I like to use here. And again, there's some various fantastic engineers. Justin Gray is someone, for example, who uses this term envelopment a lot in when he's speaking around this subject. And this idea of this natural envelopment, the sound happening around us and progressing through space in a way that we understand, that we relate to and become enveloped. I think immersed suggests this kind of full submersion and things coming from everywhere. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the movement of sound through space in a very natural kind of way. And also interesting, let's look at vocal. With vocals, we did see in the dry sound, predominantly front with occasional bits of height. Here we see vocal reverbs being all over the place. Again, that idea of creating that envelopment of the image around us, but still respectful of that core stereo. And for me, this leads to me thinking about, well, this is really interesting. It's interesting that we're going this way, and that this is probably one of the ways in which you can really focus on Atmos mixing. But a couple of the mixes that we listened to, and some of the mixes I've done myself, where the production has allowed it. Sometimes electronic music EDM might support this more, and sometimes you get productions where something happens in the narrative and the record starts to spin out and go out of control, where you can actually start to do things that are not real. I think a lot of this kind of idea of envelopment that we're talking about here is about creating something natural that we can relate to based on natural sound in space. And so I think really we've almost got sort of two ways of working. And of course, there's overlap. If it was a Venn diagram, this is not two separate things. We can overlap them and we can combine techniques. But I think we're either looking at trying to create very natural envelopment where, we have a sound that's coming at us in different ways from different places, but still sounds like that sound. Or we can go for this kind of approach where we're actually doing things. There's much more kind of engineer, I suppose, involvement in doing things in a slightly less natural way, in more of a cartoon. And music mixing has always been a bit of a cartoon. We're not trying to create realities. We're not picking reverbs because they sound real. We don't use that Lexicon 480 plate with a bit of delay on it on a vocal because it makes it sound like a real space. We use it because it sounds like a record, because it's an established musical language. So we can now establish new musical language. So I think we've got two ways of kind of going. And today, actually, we wanted to focus, because I think it's the predominant thing at the moment. I think we'll talk a bit more about this in our sort of conclusions when we start looking at ways of being more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but you know what I mean, almost more aggressive in the way that we mix. Atmos needs to come in the production stage. What we want to talk about briefly today is this idea of creating something natural that naturally sounds big, engaging and exciting. And one of the ways we think that's very exciting about doing this is taking sounds and re-recording them, putting some speakers with our mix into a space, and then having a collection of microphones in that space to capture that natural reverb back and to create that immersive experience. And that's what we'd like to do with you today. So, it's interesting. I think over the last couple of years, people have suggested, well, why do I need to use a recording studio? I can mix at home on headphones using tools like Virtuoso. Great. But actually, if you're going to do this, if we're going to capture amazing natural spaces to then enhance the record, never before, well, not for a long time, has space been, I think, so potentially important. And yes, again, we can use non-real spaces, but there is something magic about moving the speaker around, finding that point where the room sounds incredible and then recording that space. So we'd like to do that for you today. So we're going to cut away now. And we're going to show you a mic array that we set up. We're going to do a quick re-recording of some drums, and then we'll hear a stereo mix of a track. We'll then hear the re-recording of using binaural. So again, you'll need to check this on headphones. You'll hear a binaural re-recording, binaurally played back re-recording of this using spatial audio. And then we'll continue and play you a little bit more of that into the track to give you a sense. We'll also do some quick panning so you can hear some things moving around and start to hear what it might be like to take something where we just we spread it, we envelop. Rather than that, crazy panning, spinning, those kind of things, which is also exciting, but we'll talk about that another time. So let's head to the studio. Welcome back to our live room. You can see here now, we're actually using a setup that was used yesterday for a bit of recording with acoustic guitar and drums, where there was a bit of experimentation going on in capturing immersive audio. We're making use of this PCMA technique, effectively a PCMA technique here, where we've got microphones that are pointing down, microphones that are pointing up. You might think, oh, shouldn't that microphone be way up in the sky? Well, actually, the separation that you get with the two microphones is such that we actually get really strong height localization, but also with all the benefits of this coincident behavior in terms of transients arriving at them and sounding coherent and not getting a big old phase mess, which is great. We've got a couple of side mics. You can just use this array just with the 4 mics, but because this is a bit more spread out, we've got this here, and you can ignore the drums that are here for today, so they're here for a different project. But what we have got is a pair of small speakers that we've placed into the room. And again, this isn't sort of necessarily where I would always go first up with the position. But today what we've tried to do is to get some kind of reverb splash from this it's got quite a kind of lively top end, this space. It's quite an interesting space. So we've tried to excite the space by pointing the speakers here. And what will happen is the drums will come out of these speakers into this room, and this array will then capture that sound. That's all the sound bouncing off the walls in a supernatural way. The other great thing we find is the kick drum triggers the room differently to the snare drum. And as we move the speakers around, it's like, oh, that sounds really great there. So we're hoping now that this array is going to give us something that sounds really, really natural, that lets us to create an enveloping experience for the listener that isn't weird or distracting, feels natural, and works really, really well for the listener. Because the purpose of today's process is to create an Atmos experience that feels like a spatially enhanced version of the stereo, but still has that sense of glue that we get from that. So let's do some re-recording, and then we can have a listen. Welcome back, everybody. We've now hit the point where we need to move on to headphones for the best audio experience. I'm going to be playing you binauralized audio via Virtuoso. You'll still be able to hear the audio on speakers if you're in an environment where you're on speakers, but it will sound a bit strange, a bit phasey, a bit bright. You won't hear the changes in the same way as you would if you engaged via headphones. So if you can, now is the time to pop your headphones on. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick listen to our drums, our stereo drums, with no production reverb. So these are purely our mixed drums, but with the reverbs turned off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the reverb that we've just recorded by going into our room with our immersive array to capture the natural reverb of the space. So we've effectively remade our room mics with the energy being forced onto the walls from the speakers. And then we're going to hear those with the drums, and then just so you can hear it, we'll hear that on its own as well. So we'll hear those reverbs on their own, just to get a sense of that of a change in kind of perspective and envelopment when we go from hearing our traditional stereo drums to our drums when we lift here. And again, for those of you watching the screen itself, the drums are red. So again, you'll see when the drums are active from when the solo lights are on our drum tracks, which are red. And then we've got this sort of purpley color here for our ambiences that we've recorded, our immersive ambiences. So again, you'll be able to visually see when we move from element to element. So let's have a start. We'll pop our headphones on, and let's start just with our drums. And I'm now going to open up the reverb that we've just recorded. And let's hear just that reverb now. And again, we'll reintroduce our drums there at the end. And I think, again, this was a very quick example that was made, but I think, we're hearing with that reverb, it's quite a natural room sound that does add a lot of depth and sort of natural envelopment to those drums. I'm not distracted by snare coming from the side and tom coming from above me, or something that feels unnatural. It's a very natural representation of our drums, but capturing some of that natural space from the room, which I think is quite exciting. And of course, we can do this with plugins as well. We could have our reverbs, and in fact, we could even decide. You'll see here we've got all of our production reverbs here. We could unmute our production reverbs and then place them into our production should we want to, and then move those reverbs around. But there's just something very natural, very real and very glued sounding about using the natural spaces. And when you combine it with the created spaces from the production, I think we can really add something that naturally envelops. It's quite exciting. Fantastic. So what we'll do is we will play in a little bit of a slightly more advanced version of this Atmos mix for you, and again we'll play that in for you a little bit later, so you can hear some of that Atmos mix that's been worked on a little bit more. So we'll do that, but I think before we move on to that, it's probably a good time to think about engaging in some Q&A. Now, normally with these sessions, the Q&A would take place with an audience, but today I'm here in the studio without an audience present. So instead, what I'd like to do is to invite my colleague Mark Wendell in, and we're going to have a bit of a discussion around some aspects of Atmos, those kind of things. Mark has actually done an Atmos mix of this very track previously, so it'll be an opportunity to have some Q&A around those. So we'll be right back with you when Mark's in to do a bit of Q&A, and then we'll finish up at the end of the video and play you a mix that's a bit further on in terms of some kind of worked on Atmos content, and we'll be able to move between the stereo and the Atmos versions so you can hear those differences. Fantastic, great. I'll see you again soon.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Q&A part of this Discover lecture. I'm Mark Wendell, the studio manager here at the University of Huddersfield. And as Andrew introduced me, I also have a keen interest in Atmos and immersive techniques and experiments. Andrew, I really want to thank you for your time in taking us through all of your research, some of the practices, even showing us some recording. You really fit quite a lot into such a short amount of time there. I know usually would take a lot longer at university level. But yeah, I just want to ask you some questions around some of the stuff that you've discussed today, if that's okay. The first question would be, this is quite a commercial industry in a way, the audio industry. Obviously, we always think about the records that come out and stuff, the tools that we're using, right from the console through to the production tools like Pro Tools is all very commercial. What's the advantage of a university in this industry, and where are they positioned in the field of immersive audio?
So, actually, something you said in the question, so when you said to me, normally we take more time over this. Time is the key factor for me, because actually we've worked with some big studios and had conversations with some big studios around methods for capturing Atmos content for big A-list commercial release. And one of the reasons they come and ask us is because we have time to discover things. And when you're working in industry, the room is hired, the booking ends, then the next one starts, and you don't get that time to try things necessarily as much as you'd like to, but there's a real push to innovate. So actually what industry is looking for, and this is now actually, I think, something you'll see in other industries where there's relationships between industry and universities, is that industry does things a particular way, and they're looking for universities to inform how they might do it differently or better. And that might be about efficiency and lean management if you're thinking about manufacturing aeroplanes or something. But from our perspective, it gives us the time to try things. And not just to try things and go, oh, that worked, excellent, we'll do that again, but to then understand why. Why did it work? And I think actually in our area, we're quite lucky because we have some research teams who are very focused on very technical aspects. They're looking at, well, actually what's happening when I put this microphone here, looking at able to actually calculate. They're using combinations of practical exploration and scientific understanding of the tool and also the way that we perceive to plug all these things together to generate these systems that we can then use. But we've also got time in practice to then put this into practice, to try things, to explore things. and to make some mistakes. I always say to my students, like, make mistakes, because that's when we learn. We learn from making mistakes, we reflect on them, and actually one person's mistake might be another person's success. So sometimes you've got to go, well, that didn't work, but maybe it would work in this context. We have the time to go and try it. In industry, if they try something and it doesn't work, it might end up on the on the classic on the old cutting room floor, and actually sometimes you leave some of your best bits behind because you don't get a chance to explore them. So I think one of the roles that we have that's really exciting to be a part of is in trying things, experimenting, documenting, understanding, and then being able to inform people who are at that coalface and need to work quickly. So for me, that's really what we're all about. We're all about doing that practice, taking the time to learn from it, and then reflecting on what we learn, and then informing industry of how to do things better. And of course, you might inform them of something, and then 6 months later, you've come up with something else that's contradictory or better in some way, different in some way. And it's about having that ongoing dialogue and working with industry to allow them to focus on getting the content out to the listener, and we can then focus on how to make that content creation and capture better. So for me, that's the way forward.
I mean, I would say, from my point of view, in the stereo world and stereo records, there's been fantastic stereo records that have come out, and, you can go to some amazing studios. They've got their tried methods that are incredible. They get the results, or they get certain results. That's their character, and that's the state of the industry. I would say with the immersive game, it's incredible how much of this can take place, like you say, in the realm of academia. And like you say, the conversations that we have with studios, with producers, with engineers, where I've never before in the industry heard people say to me, "Oh, I've read that latest research," and it was a producer saying that to me.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah,
the first time.
You've got producers reading AS journals. It's amazing.
Yeah, or at least for the first time in a long time.
In a long time, yeah.
It felt like the things had kind of moved in a different way. With some of your research, you had dissected Atmos mixes and looked at where things were positioned and placed and playback, and which instrumentation was stronger from certain places. I was going to ask you, that research was conducted around a year or two ago.
Yeah, 18 months probably. Yeah.
What would you say is your opinion on the state of Atmos now? Is it still in that same place as it was 18 months ago, or is it a moving field? Is it in flux? Where is it at?
Yeah, so I'm starting the research again now to get another snapshot of where we are now. But I would say from my own personal perspective, I think we have a better understanding of why things were the way they were. And it was about the stereo being the dominant format and then matching that stereo, because the stereo is what's been crafted. The stereo is that art that multiple stakeholders have contributed to bringing this thing into the world, and real pride and in that product, and then Atmos offering another window into that. You have to respect that stereo. It's not necessarily a negative thing, though there are times where it feels like a negative thing, because it feels like, oh wow, if we just added a reverb here, we could suddenly create this depth, but you can't do that because it would then make it too different from the stereo. So I think what we're seeing is appetite for music where there is a bit more wriggle room in the differences about what matters, what needs to translate, what is perhaps less important. So I think we're seeing some slightly more adventurous things happening there. So certain translation sacrifices made to create more of an enveloping thing. But I think in general we are still seeing things looking similarly. But I do think that the way that things are gluing is becoming better. The sense of not things just coming from particular speakers, like, well, that's a guitar, so I'll put it there. That's drums, I'll put it there. That's a piano, I'll put it there. This is vocal reverb, we'll put it up there and we'll bounce it. It feels that there's less of that formulaic and a bit more, I think, a musical approach to making use of this. And the other thing that we're seeing more of, I think, and again, it's anecdotal at the moment. I'm doing some work to try and verify this more. But when speaking with producers, listening to music, speaking with artists as well, is music that's now being conceived with the Atmos in mind from the beginning. I'm working on a project at the moment where we're doing the album from the ground up with the aim of also performing it as an Atmos thing. So we're now looking at it all the way through to the live environment. And when it's amazing, and actually this reamp process is really interesting, when you get the artists in and they're thinking about, I've got this sound, actually I'd like to record this sound separately. And I was talking about, well, let's move the speaker. Let's move the speaker around once we've recorded it, and they're performing it and they feel part of it. It's this huge creative, kind of exciting environment where we're visiting this album where everybody's thinking about it from day one. To this point, I would say the majority of, and it's a generalization, but the majority of commercial Atmos mixes, the work is post-production work, post-mix. So all the decisions have already been made about how that record needs to sound, and it's about then creating an immersive experience that still translates and connects to the original stereo. So I think it's going to be interesting as we start to see more content that embraces this. We know that particularly, obviously we've spoken about different providers today, that we know that through Apple streaming services, we're able to receive spatial audio, and there are others as well, Amazon, etc. Tidal will offer a spatial experience. That there's a hunger for content that benefits from being in that format. So I do hope that we'll start to see more evidence of this work that has more focus, almost I say from the ground up into this. And the other thing, of course, is genre based. We're seeing different behaviours in different genres. Some genres where perhaps the production is very stripped out. There's maybe a very stripped out beat led by some kind of vocal content and maybe something slightly atmospheric going on. That doesn't naturally lend itself to being placed in space, because all of a sudden it just feels quite empty and quite hollow. Then you get very dense kind of rock instrumental type content that lends itself to that envelopment where you can spread the sound out, but there's only so much you can do before it starts to not make sense, or it loses that weight that we've become used to from that kind of where the stereo has defined the sound, and to spread it out, all of a sudden it starts to sound like a bit of a demo or something. It's like, it sounds like how do we make that? Because again, when we go binaural, there is a process effectively of adding ambience that can lead to a reduction in, say, heaviness on guitars, those kind of things. But then there are also, a lot of, if you listen to a lot of sort of clean pop production, a lot of the instrumentation is synth-based, sample-based, sometimes real drums, etc., where those sounds, it sounds great if you've got this kind of arpeggiated piano that is moving, or you've got a synth pad that wants to hang in midair, or you've got a sort of a filter sweep. If you've got a filter, why not move it? I just did that, didn't I? Gesturally, I couldn't help myself. Let's do that with it. So I think we are seeing people being more daring where the production supports it. So I think that's really where I think the interest is at the moment, is what does the production afford? And actually it's about coming up with what becomes a better experience. It's about what better is. And sometimes I think people will listen to an Atmos mix that isn't that different, but just sounds bigger. Oh, it only sounds bigger. Well, hang on a minute. How many times are we mixing in stereo and going, God, I wish it sounded bigger? Yeah. Well, now it does, but now bigger's not enough because I've got all these speakers and I'm not spinning stuff. It doesn't have to be wacky, but I think we are seeing different languages appearing for different genres, and also in relation to what's the intent. What's the intent in terms of what was the purpose of this Atmos? And I'm now working on a couple of projects where the aim is therefore to be no stereo. If you want to hear a stereo, it's a fold down from the Atmos. Yeah. So it's a wide field, isn't it? But I think we are seeing some kind of standardizations in approach. And one of the ones that we've looked at today was much more around that more natural kind of envelopment. But we're also seeing some really exciting work where the production supports doing something with it. Yeah. And often I think it's in response to some kind of musical gesture. We talk about musical gesture, a gesture being some kind of a movement where something happens. And often in music, there'll be like you might have they go, and the sweep is a gesture, and that gesture then needs to be finished by something, and the explosion stops that. Two very big gestures, and immediately I'm like, let's rise up and let's push it into the sub on the floor, and it drops and hits. I can make a gesture bigger. Yeah. The other problem, and I don't want to get into this too much today, is what you actually get to mix. Yeah. This is one of the great challenges. I recently did a track, and there was, it was 70, 80 tracks in the production, and I found I was generating 100 odd stems if I wanted true creative control, which is what was wanted from this project. But actually more often than not, what will happen is that we are given a very limited number of stems. So another thing that needs to happen with industry, and another bit of the research actually that I'm looking at the moment, is coming up with approaches for how we generate the stems to then allow the Atmos engineer to do something interesting. Because you might listen to an Atmos mix and go, well, it's not that interesting, is it? But what you don't know is that the Atmos engineer was given a drum stem that already had reverb on it, a vocal stem that already had reverb on it, a music stem that already had reverb on it, and maybe a couple of a synth, a beat, something else. The very limited range of tools. What do you do with that?
No,
You can't get the separation that you need. And I've gone in and before and chopped out individual notes where I can get them from stems, because there might be an arpeggio and I might want the top note of an arpeggio to sit high and the bottom note to sit low, because our brains like high notes high and low notes low. But if you haven't got it and you can't separate it, it becomes very difficult. We've heard again of practitioners in discussions trying to separate the reverbs from the vocals to allow them to put the reverb somewhere else, because they're not allowed to add reverbs on top of the production reverb. So it's not just about where does this stuff go, it's also about what have you got to work with. And I think it's really important when listening critically to Atmos mixes to understand that at the moment there isn't necessarily a sort of defined protocol for what you get given, or indeed for what the actual intent is in terms of what are we trying to achieve. So I think it's easy to sit in judgment, isn't it, from your armchair, when actually there's a whole lot happening, and this is so new. It's so new, but it's moving so fast. So it's interesting, it's exciting.
I think that's one of the kind of something that you've really captured there is the push-pull at the moment between necessarily where labels are, where distribution is, where artists are, where producers are, where education is kind of coming into this as well. It's an exciting industry because at the moment there isn't a go-to platform or even process, and that's what makes it incredibly exciting. Hence why as soon as we mention the word Atmos to certain people, all of a sudden we seem to be engaged in like 2-hour-long conversations with people, which is incredible. And that's why I say to students, like come here, really like involve yourself in those conversations. They might seem a little bit at first like daunting, but the conversation really does start to take off quick, and it's exciting. It
doesn't, and it's not like this is out there and wacky and new, because we're used to hearing sound. In 3 dimensions. We have a deep understanding of musical language, like of various different pop genres. I could say a pop genre to anyone watching this, and they will be able to list 10 characteristics that they associate with that genre, even if they're not necessarily engaged with that genre. We have all of this already. This is just a new light to look through, where we can do things from making it a bit bigger, all the way through to completely reinventing our sound and exploring gesture. And it's just interesting where people associate value. That won't necessarily see the same value in something when it did just get bigger. But that big, I find the moment I hear a bigger one, it's like, oh wow, that congested sound that sounded tiny and pushed and squashed, that suddenly feels more open. And this relaxing piece of music is more relaxing because I'm just connecting with it in a more natural way. So I think that can be the target.
Some of the misconception as well is that Atmos is here to rule all and destroy everything that's come before it. It's not that. If it sounds great in stereo and it wants to stay in stereo, it'll stay in stereo. The technology isn't here to eradicate. It's like you get there's a whole subgenre that still love producing things in mono because of the way that mono sounds and that really great kind of sparsity. That can still operate that way. We're just saying it's another tool, it's another option, it's another platform.
Yeah, I mean, it's a delivery format at the end of the day, isn't it? It's a delivery format.
So.
But the interesting thing is it's a delivery format that a very large number of people are engaging with, and not that many of them probably know that they are.
Yeah.
Which is another interesting, because it's quite sort of, as a technology, it's sort of snuck in, because you don't have to make any move yourself as the end user to engage with it. So, and there are clear pushes. There are clear industry pushes that are moving in this direction. We know from work with colleagues and commercial colleagues within our research that there is a significant push from those who hold the keys to distribution to have Atmos content. There is that push to deliver it. It's interesting. It's really interesting.
Just quickly to intersect. So thinking back to in terms of again the staging of academia and where we sit in this whole process, and if you were an aspiring student and you're toying around, is audio engineering, is music technology, is sound engineering, and it comes under many names, is that a viable pathway for me? what would you say to someone asking that question? Why is the audio engineering or music technology pathway a good thing to look at academia?
I think the first thing I would say is that you have to really want to. You have to have that passion for it. We talk, let's be honest, when these cameras go off, we're probably going to keep talking about Atmos or mixing or production, or, we absolutely love this world. So I think when I speak to students who are thinking of doing this, they're in that spot. They already know that they love this environment. They want to be involved in this environment. So I think if you've got that passion and drive for working in this subject, and in fact, I've spoken to students over the years who have a passion and drive for it, having not really been given the opportunity to explore that in the past, but they know. They know it's something that they're really interested in. And it's such a great career path. I mean, the music industry is huge. Last year in the UK, it grew, I think it was 8% of growth or something, 4% the year before, well over $1 billion of value to just the UK economy. And when we feel sad, when we feel happy, when no matter what we're feeling, we often turn to music to either bring us out of an emotional state or to push us deeper into it. Sometimes I listen to music, I want to feel sad. It's like that can be a decision I can choose to make. I want to feel something, and I listen to something that makes me feel something. So music is such an important part of all of our lives, and it's delivered to us constantly through advertising, music, etc. Through music streaming services. Music is an accompaniment to life, and music is also something that people step out of life to do. Historically, I think it was much more of a thing, right? I'm going to stop doing my life to enjoy some music, whereas now music also exists as an accompaniment to life. So music's part of our everyday existence, and being able to be involved in that, God, there's so much opportunity. But I mean, the other thing, of course, is that you've also got games, film, lots of entertainment industries that are totally reliant not just on music but sound and sound technology. The automotive industry is enormous from an audio perspective. There are so many, and I'm sat in front of a mixing desk here that was made in England. This Audient console, it's a locally made console. We've got Calrec down the road making some of the finest broadcast companies that are available. And made locally. It's amazing. So we've got the plugins that we're using today was designed on this very campus. It's such an amazing industry that you can come in from so many different perspectives, be it as somebody who's an active performer with a strong musical background, through to somebody who's listened to hours and hours and thousands of hours indeed of music. And again, the library of the mind, we talk about the library of the mind, all the music you've ever heard influences all the music you'll ever make. That's how it works, And so no matter what angle you come at this from, you're going to have something personally invested where you have a connection with music, you have a connection with the people, the machines, the tools, whoever it is that's making that music. And then through that connection, you end up delivering something for somebody to hear that might impact their lives in a positive way.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And there's so many ways in, as I say, from manufacturing, testing, selling, creation, distribution. My word, it's a huge industry, and also has lots of synergy with other industries. Health, music and health is huge at the moment. So again, there's so many different aspects where you can take your passion for this subject and have the opportunity to have a career and a life where you get to follow and use that passion. And what really amazes me is the number of students who come in with very focused on a particular passion and then leave with a focus on a related but different passion because they discover something they didn't even know existed. And that, again, it's one of the joys of coming to university. It gives you the time to understand your subject and find yourself. And that can happen multiple times over a career. I know lots of people who will make moves in their audio related careers using all the skills they've built up, the networks they've built up, and push themselves forward and remain attached to that industry. And I always say, if you want a problem solving, ask a live engineer. Because live engineers, the world is constantly on fire, but you're constantly calm. So it's a really interesting thing. And of course, that live music, again, what a great industry that is.
So just coming off the back of that question, you said, I had another question around skill sets, but I'll just dissect what you said actually. And that's around to be interested in music technology, audio, sound. It's more about the fact that there's so many different avenues in there, ranging from, if you're interested in electronics, we're sat at a big console that's full of electronics. Whether you're interested in speaker design and acoustics and the acoustic treatment that we have in the room here with us. You know, I think we all know people who started the course with like, oh, I'm going to be the next big producer, and then within about a week or two got absolutely fascinated by acoustics, and we know acousticians out there now. And then we do have people that are, you know, brilliant drummers, trumpet players, guitar players. And one of the great things about this industry is they all end up in the same room, with the same discussions, very unique approach on things. They can learn off each other. It's collaborative. It's really exciting. And I think seeing it at university level is really great when you see kind of like the really, you know, raw shoots of those passions coming through.
And watching things that are made that could not be created without the sum of the parts making it.
Yeah, no.
It's brilliant.
It is great. We'll wrap up the Q&A there, because as we said, we could probably go for a solid 3 days of talking if we wanted.
Yeah, and probably will.
Yeah, definitely will. We'll still be here then. So I just want to thank everyone for watching. If you want to check out any of the other Discover lectures, please head to the university website. If you have any questions for Dr. Andrew Bourbon, please, you know, get in touch with the university, and we'll make sure that you can be part of the 3-day discussion. But yeah, I just want to thank you for watching, and take care.
He said fate would bring us back together if we're meant to be. He also said that fish can fly. When will you realize you have to work for all what you get? Nothing's free and nothing's fake. When does a 23-year-old grow? Worked for 2, you worked for none. When does a 23-year-old grow up? When will fish learn to fly in the starry sky? The starry sky. And one day you'll realize the fate was not the carpet here, and I've been holding on for someone that's been moving on. So if we ever meet, I will look the other way and say, fish can fly. When does a 23-year-old grow up? When will fish learn to fly in the starry sky? The starry sky. Don't be stupid. Fish can't fly.